What makes someone risk everything to fight for freedom, even when the odds are impossible? Today, we're diving into the story of Nat Turner, a man whose name evokes both reverence and fear. Born into slavery, Turner became a preacher, a visionary, and ultimately, the leader of one of the most significant slave rebellions in American history. His actions shocked the nation and left an indelible mark on the fight for freedom and justice. In this video, we'll explore Turner's upbringing and what led him to take up arms. We'll uncover the conditions of the antebellum South, the spiritual visions that inspired him, the bloody rebellion he led, and the aftermath that shook America to its core. By the end, you'll gain a deeper understanding of the courage and conviction behind Nat Turner's extraordinary story. The year was 1800. America was expanding rapidly, and the institution of slavery was deeply entrenched, particularly in the South. Virginia, where Turner was born, was a state that exemplified the brutal realities of this system. Enslaved people made up nearly half the population in some counties, and their labor fueled the economy while their humanity was systematically denied. White fear of rebellion simmered under the surface, as enslaved people vastly outnumbered their oppressors. Virginia was a microcosm of the nation's contradictions. While the state prided itself on being the birthplace of American democracy, with figures like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson shaping the ideals of liberty and independence, it was also the largest slaveholding state in the country. Enslaved individuals accounted for nearly 40% of Virginia's population, and in some counties, they far outnumbered white residents. This demographic imbalance bred a constant undercurrent of fear among white Virginians, who were keenly aware of the power an organized rebellion could wield. The recent success of the Haitian Revolution, where enslaved people had overthrown their oppressors and established their own nation, only deepened this anxiety. The fear of rebellion was not unfounded. Just months before Nat Turner's birth, Gabriel Prosser, an enslaved blacksmith in Richmond, had planned a large-scale uprising involving hundreds of enslaved people. The plot was discovered and thwarted, but it shook the foundations of Virginia's slaveholding society. In response, lawmakers passed a series of draconian measures to clamp down on both enslaved and free black populations. Teaching enslaved individuals to read or write became a criminal offense, as literacy was seen as a dangerous tool of empowerment. Laws restricted the movement of enslaved people, while slave patrols were established to monitor and control their activities, especially at night. For enslaved people, the system was brutally dehumanizing. Families were routinely torn apart through sales, and acts of resistance, whether running away, disobeying, or simply slowing down work, were met with violent punishments. Yet, despite the oppression, enslaved individuals found ways to resist and maintain their humanity. Through spiritual practices, community bonds, and quiet acts of defiance, they nurtured a shared hope for freedom. This resilience created an undercurrent of resistance that, though often invisible to their oppressors, remained ever-present. Leaders like Nat Turner emerged from this environment, shaped by both the cruelty they endured and the strength they witnessed in their communities. The economy of Virginia, like much of the South, was built on the labor of enslaved people. Initially driven by tobacco, the state's agricultural industry had diversified by 1800, but it still relied heavily on the forced labor of black men, women, and children. Enslaved people not only worked in the fields, but also in skilled trades, domestic roles, and even urban industries. Their contributions were the backbone of Virginia's wealth, yet they received nothing in return except a lifetime of subjugation. Against this backdrop, rebellion was not just a possibility, it was an inevitable response to the systemic denial of freedom and humanity. Nat Turner was born into this world on a plantation in Southampton County, Virginia. The area was rural and oppressive, with sprawling farms and small communities dominated by enslaved labor. For those enslaved, life was grueling: long days in the fields, violent punishments for disobedience, and the constant threat of family separation. Nat Turner's birth on October 2, 1800, marked the beginning of a life shaped by both profound suffering and a unique sense of purpose. His mother, believed to have been born in Africa, carried with her a deep sense of cultural identity and resistance to the institution of slavery. Family lore suggests that she instilled in young Nat the belief that he was destined for greatness. It said she regarded his birth as a sign of something extraordinary, reinforcing this idea through her words and actions. This early foundation helped Turner see himself as more than just a slave. He was someone with a higher calling. His extraordinary intellect was recognized early by both his family and his enslavers. Turner exhibited a remarkable ability to learn and understand things without formal instruction, which his community interpreted as evidence of his spiritual gifts. His owner's family permitted him to learn to read, a rare and often prohibited privilege for enslaved people, as literacy was seen as a potential path to rebellion. Nat's ability to read opened the door to a new world of ideas, particularly through the Bible, which would become the cornerstone of his worldview. The Bible captivated Turner from an early age. As he immersed himself in its stories and teachings, he began to see parallels between the oppression of the Israelites in Egypt and the plight of enslaved African Americans. Turner's faith became the lens through which he viewed his life, his struggles, and his destiny. He believed that his intelligence and spiritual insights were signs from God, preparing him for a divine mission. This conviction would grow stronger over time, eventually leading him to interpret the visions and signs he experienced as instructions to lead his people to freedom. Turner's spiritual life wasn't just a private affair, it resonated deeply within the enslaved community around him. He began preaching to other enslaved people, earning a reputation as a prophet and a leader. His sermons often drew from the themes of liberation and divine justice, giving voice to the suppressed hopes and anguish of his listeners. These early years of faith, family, and growing recognition within his community laid the foundation for the revolutionary path he would later take. Turner's mother's belief in his destiny, his gift of literacy, and his immersion in scripture all combined to shape him into a figure who saw himself not just as a man, but as a chosen instrument of God's will. Despite the recognition of his intellect and his role as a preacher, Nat Turner was not exempt from the brutal realities of slavery. From a young age, he was subjected to the same dehumanizing treatment as other enslaved people, backbreaking labor, constant surveillance, and a life defined by the denial of basic human dignity. The violence of the system was inescapable, and Turner witnessed its horrors firsthand. He saw friends and family members whipped for minor infractions, a punishment designed not only to harm the individual but to instill fear in the entire enslaved community. These moments of cruelty were seared into Turner's memory, reminding him daily of the oppressive force he lived under. One of the most devastating aspects of slavery was the forced separation of families. Turner observed this repeatedly, as enslaved mothers, fathers, and children were sold away from one another without warning. The trauma of these separations tore at the fabric of the enslaved community, yet it also fueled their shared desire for freedom. For Turner, these acts of cruelty were deeply personal. They not only reinforced the inhumanity of the system, but also awakened in him a fierce determination to end it. This resolve would become a driving force in his life, strengthening his conviction that something had to be done to challenge the system of slavery. Turner's suffering and the suffering he witnessed around him began to take on a spiritual dimension. As a young man, he experienced visions that he interpreted as messages from God. These visions often came during moments of prayer, fasting, or deep reflection. Turner described seeing images of celestial battles, hearing voices, and receiving divine instructions. In one vision, he claimed that he saw white spirits and black spirits engaged in battle, which he understood as a sign that God intended him to lead his people to freedom. These experiences convinced Turner that his life had a purpose beyond mere survival, that he was chosen by God to play a pivotal role in liberating the enslaved. Turner's visions were not unusual for the time. Many enslaved people turned to religion as a source of hope and resistance, interpreting the Bible as a text that promised eventual liberation. Stories like the Exodus, in which Moses led the Israelites out of bondage, resonated deeply with the enslaved, offering a powerful metaphor for their own plight. Turner's role as a preacher amplified his ability to share these ideas. His visions, combined with his deep biblical knowledge, elevated his standing within the enslaved community and solidified his belief that he was divinely appointed to act. The brutality he endured and witnessed, combined with his profound spiritual convictions, set Turner on the path toward rebellion, where he would attempt to fulfill what he believed was his God-given mission. By 1831, Nat Turner had become a figure of spiritual authority and leadership within the enslaved community of Southampton County, Virginia. Known as the Prophet, Turner's reputation as a preacher was grounded in his powerful oratory, his interpretations of the Bible, and the mystical visions he claimed were messages from God. Turner believed he was chosen for a divine mission to lead his people out of bondage, a conviction that became unshakable as his visions grew more frequent and vivid. He interpreted a solar eclipse in February 1831 as the final divine sign that the time for action had arrived. For Turner, this was not merely a rebellion, it was a holy war against the institution of slavery, ordained by God. Turner's rebellion was meticulously planned, though his resources were limited. He gathered a small, trusted group of 6 initial followers, all enslaved men, who shared his determination and faith. Together, they devised a strategy to strike at night when their oppressors would be most vulnerable. Turner believed that the uprising could spark a larger movement, inspiring enslaved people across the South to rise up in solidarity. His vision was grand, but his immediate goal was practical: to seize weapons, recruit more participants, and continue their march toward liberation. Turner's ability to galvanize others through his spiritual authority and unwavering resolve was key to initiating the rebellion. The uprising began on the night of August 21, 1831. Turner and his followers moved stealthily under cover of darkness, armed with axes, knives, and farm tools, whatever weapons they could find. They first attacked the household of Turner's enslaver, Joseph Travis, killing him and his family in their sleep. From there, the group moved from plantation to plantation, liberating enslaved people and killing approximately 60 white people, including men, women, and children. The killings were brutal and methodical, driven by a deep-seated fury against the institution of slavery and the systemic violence it inflicted upon their lives. Turner justified these actions as divine retribution for centuries of oppression. The rebellion lasted just over 48 hours before it was suppressed by local militias and armed white citizens. Turner and many of his followers went into hiding, but the rebellion had already left an indelible mark. The sheer scale of the uprising and its symbolic defiance sent shockwaves throughout the South. White communities were gripped with fear, reacting with widespread violence and paranoia. In the immediate aftermath, over 100 black people, many of whom had no involvement in the rebellion, were brutally murdered by mobs seeking vengeance. Turner himself evaded capture for nearly 2 months, a fact that only heightened white anxiety and reinforced his legendary status among the enslaved. The rebellion, though ultimately quashed, marked a turning point in the history of American slavery. It exposed the underlying fear and instability of a society built on human bondage. For Turner, his rebellion was a fulfillment of divine purpose. For the enslaved community, it was a moment of collective defiance against an otherwise insurmountable system. And for the white South, it was a terrifying reminder of the inherent resistance to slavery, one that would lead to even harsher laws and deeper divisions that foreshadowed the coming Civil War. After evading capture for nearly 2 months following the suppression of the rebellion, Nat Turner was discovered hiding in a hollowed-out tree on October 30, 1831. Weakened from weeks on the run and with no means of escape, he surrendered without resistance. He was taken to the Southampton County Jail, where he was kept in isolation, awaiting trial. Turner's capture was a significant event, as white authorities hoped to use his trial to both understand the motives behind the rebellion and send a clear message to others who might consider resisting the institution of slavery. Turner's trial began on November 5, 1831, in the Southampton County Courthouse. It was a highly publicized event, drawing crowds eager to see the man who had orchestrated one of the most significant slave rebellions in American history. The trial lasted only a few hours. Turner, who had no legal representation and was denied the opportunity to truly defend himself, pled not guilty on the grounds that his actions were commanded by God. His calm, composed demeanor during the proceedings shocked and unnerved the court. Turner showed no remorse, maintaining that he was carrying out divine will and that he was simply an instrument of God's judgment. One of the key pieces of evidence used during the trial was a confession Turner gave to Thomas R. Gray, a local lawyer who visited him in jail. Gray recorded Turner's words, later publishing them as the Confessions of Nat Turner. In this document, Turner recounted his visions and the spiritual convictions that had driven him to rebel. Though some have questioned Gray's editorial influence on the narrative, the Confessions provided a rare glimpse into Turner's mind, revealing the depth of his religious fervor and his unshakable belief in the righteousness of his cause. On November 11, 1831, Nat Turner was executed by hanging in Jerusalem, Virginia, modern-day Cortland. He met his death with the same composure he had shown throughout his trial. Witnesses reported that he displayed no fear, reinforcing his belief that he was fulfilling a divine mission. Turner's body was subjected to posthumous mutilation, a common practice used to desecrate and dehumanize those who defied the institution of slavery. His remains were reportedly distributed as macabre souvenirs, underscoring the vindictive and violent nature of the white response to his rebellion. Turner's execution did not silence his legacy. For many enslaved people, he became a symbol of defiance and the willingness to fight for freedom, even at great personal cost. For white Southerners, his rebellion reinforced their fears of insurrection and led to harsher laws, including stricter patrols, limits on black gatherings, and greater restrictions on the education and mobility of both enslaved and free black people. The rebellion and Turner's trial exposed the deep tensions within a society built on slavery, tensions that would continue to grow until they erupted into the Civil War. Nat Turner's rebellion sent shockwaves throughout the South and the nation at large. For enslaved people, his actions were a powerful demonstration of resistance in a system that sought to crush all avenues of dissent. His willingness to risk, and ultimately, sacrifice his life to fight for freedom resonated deeply within the enslaved community, inspiring quiet acts of defiance and fostering a sense of solidarity. Though many enslaved individuals faced even harsher conditions in the aftermath, Turner's rebellion became a symbol of the unyielding desire for liberty and the refusal to accept oppression passively. For the abolitionist movement, Turner's uprising was both a rallying point and a stark reminder of the urgency of their cause. While some abolitionists, particularly in the North, were uncomfortable with the violence of the rebellion, they used it to emphasize the inevitable consequences of perpetuating slavery. Turner's actions underscored the moral and political crisis at the heart of the American experiment. How could a nation founded on liberty continue to uphold such a brutal and dehumanizing institution? Turner's rebellion became a case study in the necessity of abolition, fueling debates that would intensify in the decades leading up to the Civil War. For white Southerners, Turner's rebellion was a terrifying revelation of the fragility of their dominance. The violence of the uprising shattered the illusion that slavery was a stable system, exposing the ever-present undercurrent of resistance among the enslaved population. In response, Southern legislatures enacted even harsher laws to tighten their control. These included severe restrictions on the education, assembly, and movement of both enslaved and free black people. The so-called Black Codes aimed to crush any potential for future uprisings, but they also created an even more repressive and volatile society. The paranoia ignited by Turner's rebellion led to widespread violence and collective punishment. In the weeks following the uprising, vigilante mobs and militias killed more than 100 black people, many of whom had no connection to the rebellion. This brutal retaliation further entrenched racial divides and heightened tensions within Southern society. The rebellion also strengthened pro-slavery rhetoric, as white Southerners pointed to Turner's actions as evidence of the danger posed by emancipating enslaved people, reinforcing their arguments for maintaining and expanding the institution. Nat Turner remains one of the most polarizing figures in American history. For many, he is a hero and martyr, a man who dared to rise against the greatest injustice in American history. His rebellion is seen as an act of righteous defiance, a powerful assertion of humanity in the face of dehumanization. Turner's story is often highlighted in discussions of resistance, reminding us that freedom is rarely given freely, it must be fought for, sometimes at great cost. For descendants of enslaved people and those who continue to grapple with the legacy of slavery, Turner's courage stands as a symbol of the unrelenting pursuit of justice. Conversely, some view Turner's actions through a lens of controversy, focusing on the violence of the rebellion, which included the deaths of women and children. Critics argue that his methods, while aimed at dismantling a system of unspeakable brutality, crossed moral lines. This debate reflects the broader tensions in how societies remember historical figures who resist oppression with force. Turner's actions force us to wrestle with uncomfortable truths about the moral and practical complexities of resistance. What makes Nat Turner's story so compelling, even today, is its ability to challenge us on multiple levels. His rebellion compels us to confront the unimaginable horrors of slavery and the desperate measures it drove people to take. It forces us to examine the systemic violence that defined the institution and question how we would respond in such a context. Turner's story also highlights the power of faith, conviction, and leadership in driving social change, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Above all, Nat Turner's life and actions remain a reminder of the human cost of oppression and the lengths to which individuals will go to fight for freedom and dignity. Nat Turner's story challenges us to ask difficult questions. What would we do in his position? How do we reconcile the moral complexities of his rebellion with the righteous cause behind it? And what does his fight for freedom teach us about justice today? Today, the fight for equity and justice continues through the efforts of organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, HRC. Founded in 1980, the HRC is the largest LGBTQ+ civil rights organization in the United States, advocating for a world where everyone can live their lives free from discrimination, violence, and inequality. Their work spans a wide range of initiatives, from fighting for legislative protections to providing resources that empower marginalized communities. Like Nat Turner's story, the HRC's mission is rooted in the belief that justice is worth pursuing, even in the face of immense challenges. One of the HRC's most impactful efforts is its advocacy for federal and state-level policies to protect LGBTQ+ individuals from discrimination. The organization played a key role in the fight for marriage equality, and they continue to work tirelessly to ensure protections in areas like employment, healthcare, housing, and education. Their campaigns aim to dismantle systemic inequities and ensure that the rights and dignity of all people are recognized and respected. By mobilizing grassroots supporters and building coalitions with other social justice organizations, the HRC works to create a more inclusive society. In addition to policy work, the Human Rights Campaign is committed to creating safe spaces for LGBTQ+ youth. Their programs, such as the HRC Foundation's Welcoming Schools initiative, provide tools and training for educators to create affirming environments where students can thrive. The HRC also addresses the intersection of racial justice and LGBTQ+ rights, recognizing that many individuals face compounded discrimination. Through initiatives like My Body, My Health, the HRC focuses on combating health disparities, particularly among Black and Brown LGBTQ+ communities. The Human Rights Campaign reminds us that the fight for justice is ongoing and multifaceted. Their work honors the spirit of resistance and determination exemplified by figures like Nat Turner, showing us that meaningful change is possible when individuals and organizations come together to challenge oppression. As we reflect on Turner's legacy, the efforts of the HRC serve as a modern reminder that the pursuit of equity and dignity remains as vital today as it was in his time. To learn more about the Human Rights Campaign and how you can support their vital work, be sure to check the video description for links and resources. Be sure to check the description below for more resources on Nat Turner and the history of slave resistance in America. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into history. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Next week, we'll explore the life of Rosa Parks, whose courageous stand against injustice sparked a movement that changed the course of history.